You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Some breaking national political news with a major tie to the Pacific Northwest. Joe Kent, a former Washington state congressional candidate and director of the National Counterterrorism Center, resigned today from his position in protest of the Iran war. In a letter to President Trump, Kent said Iran posed no imminent threat to the U.S. He blamed pressure from Israel, a pro-Israel American lobby, and misinformation in the media, which he claimed deceived Trump into striking Iran. This is the first high-profile resignation in the administration tied to the war, which is now in its third week. Jim Brunner is a reporter for the Seattle Times, and Jim's been following Joe Kent for years, like many people who cover politics here in Washington, and he joins us now. Jim, thank you very much for being here.
Great. Glad to be here.
So can you kind of give us listeners and those of us who haven't been clued into Joe Kent lately some background on who he is and his ascendancy in this role, the counterterrorism role that he just resigned from?
Yeah, Joe Kent was a congressional candidate in Southwest Washington, the 3rd Congressional District. He started out in 2022, and he ran as kind of part of Donald Trump's revenge campaign against Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, who was one of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump over the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack. So Joe Kent came on strong there. He was endorsed by Donald Trump. He beat Herrera Butler in the primary, but then because of some of his sort of extreme positions, which we can get into, he lost in the general election to Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, and then he lost a rematch 2 years later. But Trump appointed him to this National Counterterrorism Director post last year. It was kind of a continuation of their relationship. They had been, prior to this, very tightly aligned.
Yeah, and so in this letter to Trump, Kent placed the blame for the war squarely on Israel. This is a set of arguments that Don Bacon, the congressman from Nebraska, called anti-Semitism. Joe Kent has been, as you mentioned, involved in controversies before over connections to right-wing extremism. Senator Murray, in his confirmation hearings for the counterterrorism role, said that Kent was, quote, a conspiracy theorist who espouses white supremacist views. There's a number of things, the 2020 election, January 6th. He was on with me, Jim, during the 2024 campaign, and he implied basically that the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania against Trump could have been an inside job by the Secret Service. So he's got a long history of flirting with these conspiracy theories. At the same time, he is making some arguments here that Democrats are making against the war. I mean, when Joe Kent hits the YouTube circuit and starts talking about his decision to resign, what kind of credibility do you think he's going to have as a war critic?
It's going to be kind of wild because you have all kind of flip-flops here. There's people who are on the Democratic side and saying, there's some consistency, at least in his view. And I will say that I was wondering recently, Joe Kent, I haven't talked with him in quite some time, but since I started following him in 2022 when he was a relatively not very known candidate in Southwest Washington, he was going around on the campaign trail very consistently saying the U.S. needed to stay out of foreign wars, foreign interventions. He had a kind of an extreme view of that from his own combat experience, and because his wife had been killed by a terrorist attack in Syria in 2019, and he has sort of a personal, stake in all this. And even back then, he was saying U.S. shouldn't even be involved in Ukraine. We should be an isolationist country. So I was wondering, as this war goes on, which is pretty much a war of choice that we've engaged in, it seems like, how he was going to square it. And I guess today we got our answer. At the same time, he's couching it in these kind of both Trump defending, he's sort of defending Trump in a way, saying Trump was somehow misled by Israel. So it has both threads. It has the consistency of his anti-war views, which you could give him some credit for. It also has this conspiratorial strain and this sort of excusing Donald Trump as though Donald Trump was just fooled into this and wasn't, doing this of his own sort of chaotic impulses.
Yeah, I found that really interesting that there is this need to say this isn't your fault, Mr. President. It's that you were misled by these powerful media figures and Israel and Israel's lobby, which again you can't separate from conspiracy, anti-Semitism tinged conspiracies that have long been part of American life and have a resurgence on the right. At the same time, Marco Rubio, early on in this war, said that the reason we had to strike Iran was because Israel was going to attack first and Iran would strike back and hit U.S. targets. So there is an element of, the Israeli decision-making to go to war and the U.S. going along with that has been openly talked about in this administration. I want to note that Trump was unsurprisingly, I guess, dismissive of Kent and his criticisms. He said that Kent was very weak on security, and it's a good thing that he's out.
It's like, who hired this guy?
Exactly.
He praised him when he was hired, said he's going to eradicate all terrorism. And now and this is a pattern with Trump. He's for people as long as they're for him. And as soon as they become critics, he never liked them, always thought they were bad.
Yeah, sure. So what do you think this means about the MAGA coalition, Jim? Because this is a much broader schism that's been going on. It's the Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson wing versus kind of the Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham wing, right?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You're already seeing on social media where these things play out. I mean, I saw some tweets from Marjorie Taylor Greene now is kind of on the outs with a certain segment of MAGA, and she's defending Joe Kent. But Laura Loomer, the very extreme anti-Muslim conspiracy theorist, is slamming him, and people like her saying that he's responsible for leaks, national security leaks, and maybe he should be arrested or something. So it is part of this schism that is, in part about their various views about Israel and American Jews too. And some of it does get into some pretty anti-Semitic corners here.
Yeah, there's no doubt that, the Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes wing is aligned with Tucker here, and Tucker has refused to disavow them, even though they're so virulently anti-Semitic. They're also very America first, very isolationist. Other people, though, that did, more centrist figures that went with Trump in 2024 have said they are not happy with this war. Joe Rogan said he felt betrayed. But polling, shows that most Republicans have gotten in line with what's going on in Iran. Before we go here, Jim, I'm curious what you think about Kent's future. I mean, the YouTube circuit is almost assured. He did have these two unsuccessful runs against Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in the 3rd District. Is there any indication that Joe Kent wants to run for office again, is setting himself up for some kind of future political life?
That's always a possibility. I haven't heard anything yet. He still owns a house in the 3rd District, but I think he'd been renting it out and, had moved to the D.C. area to do his current job. So we'll see. I mean, it would be pretty hard to put together a coalition after he's lost twice when he now is sort of rupturing the Trump coalition. I'm pretty hard to see how that would, carry itself out in the 3rd District. At the same time, he has a lot of super fans who are behind him. And, I would definitely expect him to see him at the very least in some kind of maybe social media career. But as for another political run, I'm just not sure at this point.
Jim Brunner, reporter with the Seattle Times, on this breaking news that Joe Kent has resigned as the National Counterterrorism Center director. It does make me wonder about the future for Tulsi Gabbard, who hired Joe Kent for that role. They have been closely aligned. Gabbard has been a long anti-war advocate and warned against war with Iran while she was in the Trump administration. She's been pretty quiet. I wonder what's happening with her, Jim, and if she holds on here.
Yeah, me too. I mean, Joe Kent was kind of acting as her deputy. They've been very close, so wouldn't be surprised to see her out the door next, potentially either by her own choice or by the president's choice.
Yeah, she's supposed to go before Congress for regularly scheduled hearings, Director of National Intelligence hearings of the Senate and the House starting tomorrow. So we'll see. I bet members of Congress are going to have some questions for her. Jim Brunner, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.